Welcome, everybody. You're synchronized to researchroadshow.com, one of the most censored sites on the internet. And today is January 5th, and we're going to talk a little bit about a little company called Connect, and formerly called LJ Connections, and their ties to a bigger company called BlackRock. And if you remember, before Christmas, before the holiday break, we were talking about a company called SCYTL, SCYTL, that started out in Barcelona back in 2005 and was picked up somewhere around 2010 by a Mr. Paul Allen, the co-founder of Microsoft. But before we get into it, I apologize for the delay. I had some domestic issues somewhat associated with this story that I just couldn't put off anymore. I had to finish them up before I got into the broadcast. But I promise you, your wait will be rewarded. All right. Now let's pull up where we left off at the last broadcast for news others miss. This is Mr. Mike Lee. We made several references to him and his activities in the past two broadcasts. Mr. Mike Lee is I'm not sure if he's an employee, but he's strongly associated with Connect Voting Solutions. And after the arrest of Mr. Yu in Los Angeles County, he was arrested in Lansing, Michigan, and then he was sent down to LA to withstand trial. It was Mr. Mike Lee who put up the $500,000 bail so that Mr. Yu could walk around Los Angeles with just an ankle bracelet. And I'm not 100% sure, but I think it was Mike Lee who actually went in person to pick the $500,000 back up after Mr. Yu was released. That's just one of the oddities that we'll talk about. The conditions under which Mr. Yu received his passport, his cell phone, and they took off the ankle bracelet before the trial had even started. We'll table that for now. Let's go back to Mr. Lee. Mr. Lee not only works for Connect, he also works for BlackRock, and he has offices in San Francisco, New York, and in Amsterdam, or just west of Amsterdam. Mr. Lee is going to become an important character. Oh, wait, I didn't even put it up. Excuse me. There he is. Mr. Mike Lee. I'm going to try and zoom in on his face because I think that everyone in America should get to know Mr. Lee as well as they know people like Joe Biden or Donald Trump, or name your favorite player. Okay. Okay, so this still shot comes from a video that Harry sent. And Mr. Lee was giving an interview talking about the new Silicon Valley, there just west of Amsterdam. About 7 miles from the Schiphol airport. Why is this important? Well, many people, I had a big discussion the other day with a guy in Indiana, and he was telling me, John, everyone has different things that they're looking at, that they're investigating. You want to talk about Eugene Yu and Connect, and I prefer to think about the election fraud. I tried to explain that if you are serious about election fraud in your state, then you have to look at Connect, because Connect is, excuse the term, is connected with biological firms of every size and shape in the United States and in Europe. How do we know that? Because the Donna Wang, which we discovered on, I think it was the 2nd of November, Donna Wang is the wife of Eugene Yu. And Donna Wang was had connections to biological laboratories. She was the head at Michigan State University. She was the head of nanomedicine and nanotechnology. So, well, let's back up for a minute. Why do we suspect that this is a really important story and that some very powerful people in Europe would like it to just go away? How do we know that? Well, for starters, let's look at the transcript. Let's look at the transcript that from the 23rd of November that was sent to Harry with a lot of difficulty. That is that it took a long time for Harry to obtain a copy of this transcript, which was produced just 2 days after the hearing. But the court, the Superior Court of Los Angeles, hemmed and hawed and shuffled their feet. And so it took them, I think, 23 days to get the copy of this transcript to Harry. There's also the fact that all of Harry's emails to me over the Christmas holiday, in fact, all of the emails that Harry sent me from Thanksgiving onward wound up in my spam folder. But that could just be a fluke setting, something I did wrong with my 2 fingers, and I pushed the wrong button, and so all of Harry's and only Harry's emails went into spam. Anyway, let's go forward with the presentation. How do we know that this trial is a really big deal and that it connects BlackRock to every major biolab? It connects BlackRock to a lot of important venture capitalists in the biolab scene, or in the biological laboratory environment, let's put it that way, and connects BlackRock to some somewhat shady characters throughout Europe. How do we know all this? And why is it, for me personally, a much bigger deal than the central bank digital currency, which can only be provided with the help of rigged elections? All right, I'm having difficulty finding that transcript. Let's see. Well, let's start with SCYTL's own website. Again, SCYTL was created, it is not an American company. It started up in Barcelona, Spain in 2005 and was later acquired by the American philanthropist Paul Allen. Okay, SCYTL brags about the fact that they have around 80% of the voting machine market. Okay. Their tagline is innovating democracy. And I remind you again that innovation for the globalists doesn't mean what innovation means to you and me. So their tagline is innovating democracy. By the way, we do not have a democracy in America. Never have had. We have a republic. And our hold on that republic, on that form of government, is beginning to slip. Okay, so SCYTL says it says 90% here on this page, but Harry has dug in and found out that it's more like 80%. They have 80% of the electronic voting machines in most of the developed world, including Spain, France, Germany, Switzerland, Italy, UK. So this is on their website. And so we have to ask, how did they gain such a market share in just a few years, in less than 10 years? How did that happen? I think that it was because they had some very powerful people, including a few generals, to help them with that task of expanding their market share. Yes, not only some NATO generals from Belgium, the UK, Italy, and France, but also, drum roll please, a few generals from the Pentagon, which is just outside of Washington, D.C. And we'll get into that. All right, let's stop that for a second. So on SCYTL's homepage, they tell you, we do most of the voting machines. Now, 3 episodes ago, I explained that I was sitting in the artificial intelligence laboratory at MIT late one night, and I overheard, and this is just after the November 2016 election in the US. And they're talking about if they were paid enough money, how would they go about tricking the electronic voting machine, the motherboard or daughter boards or the SIM cards, the poll pads? What tricks would they use to rig the election? And this is not proof. All I heard was that these 3 students thought that they could do it. They could get away with it. That there were ways, if you were purchasing all of the motherboards or all of the devices, you could have a system that was undetectable to the trained eye of an investigator, someone expert in the field of motherboards, who could not see any component, who could not detect any firmware that was shady, that seemed like an illicit activity. It can be done covertly. That's the main point I'm trying to get across. So it should bother people that Paul Allen, well, let's take a look at Microsoft from its outset. Microsoft started as a software company, but by around 2010, they started hiring a lot of virologists and biologists and computational biologists. Microsoft nerd must be 30% biologists or computational biologists. Why does a software company get so heavily involved in biology? It just doesn't make sense unless there's something, a group or an entity at a much higher level that wants to do both. The computation, the control of things like Microsoft Azure, we'll get into Azure later in the week or next week, and at least the computational aspects of biology. For example, in formulating a vaccine and making sure that the vaccine has certain features and performs certain tasks according to the supercomputers. So Microsoft, well, Paul Allen has put $45 million into SCYTL around 2010 or 11. Not quite sure yet, but let's go to the next graphic. Now, another thing about Connect. How do we know that this is a big deal? Because Connect's offices in San Francisco are completely surrounded by therapeutics, major therapeutics firms, Drago, Genzyme, a huge Genzyme campus, Amgen, lots and lots of life sciences companies. In fact, except for the McDonald's and the Burger King, they're the only one out of like 80 companies on that island that is not a biological or life sciences company. So they're a software company, but everyone they know, everyone they work with, everyone that Mike Lee works with is a biologist. Okay, and that'll come up later when we talk about BlackRock. All right, I'm sorry I'm all thumbs tonight. I'm getting some bad news back from Italy and also from other U.S. states, and it's a juggling act. I know a lot of you have the same problem. It's a real juggling act right now. Okay, let's talk just real briefly about for newcomers about Mr. Yu. Okay, this is Mr. Eugene Yu, one of the few photographs we were able to find of him. Mr. Yu grew up, I think he was born in 1959 in China. He lived the first 24 years of his life in China before he ever set foot in the United States. He has been in the U.S. since at least 2003, and he comes and goes. He's back and forth. But he started LJ Connections with Mr. Lionel Nee, I believe in 2008. I'll have to go back and check that. However, he is still a Chinese citizen. He's frequently back in China. What is a Chinese naturalized? I think he did somewhere around 2010. He did get naturalization. What is a dual citizen doing in the election business in the U.S.? And keep in mind that even after his arrest and even after True the Vote exposed LJ Connect as potentially something nefarious, many counties in the U.S. continued their relationship with Connect, including LA County. They continued, despite having already put through the paperwork, Mr. George Gascon in particular, put through the paperwork in order to have Mr. Yu arrested. So he is, according to FBI files, he is a Chinese spy. What is he doing running our elections? Okay, let's put up the next one. How do we know that this case is important? The 55th District Court, Donald Allen, excuse me, let me put this up. There's a great video. If you go on Harry's website, newsothersmiss.com, and search for either Donald Allen or 55th District Court, Harry has a great video showing Judge Allen with his head in his hands, because in all his years, he's seen a lot of shenanigans, but he's never seen anything like this. So Mr. Allen, Justice Allen says that these things just usually don't happen. This is a very unusual case. The fact that he's getting extradited to Los Angeles is also unusual. But the difficult part, the interesting part here is that for the roughly 4 days that Mr. Yu was in Lansing, in jail in Michigan, Harry could not get a single transcript. He couldn't get the photocopy of the arresting paperwork. He couldn't get the name of the police officers who arrested him. He couldn't get anything on this case. So it's another reason to think that there's something big about this arrest, about this whole trial. And of course, those of you who were following us back in around Thanksgiving time know that 7 of our fellow Ospreys got on a plane, flew to LA for the trial, only to find out that the trial had been moved up twice in order to avoid reporters. They did not want any of the press at this trial. So out of the 9 days that these Ospreys were in the LA area, they were pretty much, not all of them every day, but there were some of them were in the courtroom from 8:30 till 2 o'clock every day that the court was open, and they never saw hide or hair of Mr. Eugene Yu. Now, a New York Times reporter, I think, was there once and briefly saw Mr. Yu, but the New York Times reporter wrote a single article saying, this is just conspiracy baloney. Mr. Yu is probably innocent. He might have done some real tiny infraction, but this whole thing about him being a Chinese spy is baloney. Just ignore it. And I think there was one appearance of a Washington Post reporter as well, made a cameo appearance in the court. And similar article written by him that there's nothing to see here. Just move along, good people. Okay, so everyone wants to know, where are you going with this? Let's go back to Mr. Mike Lee. I'm going to put up his picture one more time because I think that it is very important for Americans to learn his name and what he does, how he does it. Okay, Mr. Lee is talking about moving Silicon Valley, large chunks of Silicon Valley, over to the Netherlands during this interview. Why is he talking about that? Because there is a perception held by some, including Catherine Austin Fitz of Solari.com, that America is being divvied up and sold by the pound to the largest bidders. Okay. You can all make your own assessment of the veracity, if any, in that statement, but that is the perception, and Mr. Lee's behavior throughout this interview enhances or would lend credence to that argument that they are draining all the capital. For example, CalPERS. Catherine Austin Fitz did a good analysis back in February of the CalPERS situation, California Public Employee Retirement Plan. It's an absolute disaster. I think at its peak, it was something like a $60 billion fund. And now it's, you wonder if how much of that is actually left. I think that California employees who retire after 2025 are in for a big surprise, but that's not our subject today. We want to get to BlackRock, okay? Why? Why is BlackRock important here? Because out of the roughly 12,000 subscribers that John O'Loughlin, Professor Hamamoto, and Mark Kulak and George and Peter share, that is not a very high number, and we need to boost that number. But many of the people in our target audience are watching CNN and Fox News. They're not, or one of the alternative channels that are slowly being co-opted. They are not getting to the heart of the core issues, which are biological. But there are 34 million Americans who believe that there was some election fraud in 2020 and probably in 2022. Those 34 million Americans who believe there was some fraud do not have the computer background to look at the motherboard and say if it's kosher or not. But they rely on things they can see, on their own personal experience from whatever business field they were in, and they rely on people with computer experience to help them put two and two together. This is why the testimony of, I think it was in 2004, of Mr. Clinton Eugene Curtis was critical. He said that in all of these electronic machines, there is test code. And the test code can be, if you have some way of tapping into that, the firmware there, you can make that test code active during the actual election. What am I really trying to get at? In order to tap into those 34 million Americans who think there might have been or was probably experienced election fraud in their county, we have to show that some very powerful people who would have a motive to rig the election are doing everything they can to make Mr. Eugene Yu and Mr. Lionel Nee just go away. Why are they doing that? Because everyone connected with Mr. Eugene Yu and Mr. Lionel Nee is a biologist or computational biologist or a virologist, or in some way connected with the biological wing of Microsoft, including Paul Allen. And that means, and remember, 2 episodes ago, we connected Donna Wang to Charlie Lieber, right? And that whole kangaroo trial of Charlie Lieber. Because if Americans begin to understand that BlackRock is connected to all of these biological entities, especially those that are, you could argue, are very transhumanism looking, and if Americans realize that BlackRock is also running many of our elections with some help from the Pentagon, and if Americans were to realize that BlackRock is connected to many venture capitalists in Boston and New York and Silicon Valley and in Amsterdam and Rotterdam, looking that invest in these, for example, Beam Therapeutics, then Americans are going to start to get angry. That's why this case is important. That's why the powers that shouldn't be want this case to go away, because it's not just about sending some election poll worker data overseas. They're hiding under those terabytes and terabytes of data. They're hiding something very important, very, very important. And I know Susan Hockfield is in there somewhere. I'm going to find the connection between Donna Wang or Lionel Nee and Susan Hockfield. And, if it's the last thing I do. And Ed Roberts. Who is Ed Roberts? Once again, Jeffrey Epstein ran the MIT Media Lab. Joichi Ito was just a figurehead. Okay, the guy who really ran, the big boys cannot go directly to the PhD students. Okay, someone has to act as the intermediary. Someone has to query the PhD students as to what kind of fancy experiments they're working on, and how much money they need, and why they need it, and how it could help their long-term goals, and then carry that information back to the guys with the money. There is a reason that a major arm of the MIT Media Lab is called the Lord Evelyn de Rothschild's laboratory. It's right there on the door. So Jeffrey Epstein was let's say the middleman, okay, between the guys with the money for all these fancy therapeutics companies and the guys coming up with the patents. But the guy that is going to become critical to this entire story is Professor Ed Roberts. Ed Roberts is the one who finds the seed capital. He finds the first 400,000 or 700,000 for each of these therapeutics companies, and finds a way to get the right people to come from China or Italy or France or Argentina to fit the bill. And I'm thinking in particular of Pino. What's Pino's last name? Help me out. If someone... Ciaramella. Pino Ciaramella was handpicked, I believe, by Ed Roberts to do the first Moderna and then now Beam Therapeutics. So let's get back to Harry's article. I think this is one of the best articles Harry's done so far. This is last day of the year. BlackRock controls elections. I mean, lots of people kind of sort of knew that BlackRock was involved in our elections in some way. But here we have, Harry, every bit of Harry's information comes from government agencies, official websites, or from the DHS website, or from a large NGO like the World Bank or the IMF. All of his information comes from these sources. So they can't say later on, well, I think in one case, they actually pulled a website. They pulled down a website after Harry's reporting. Put up the yellow triangle site under construction. So the EIS GCC membership shall include the following voting members: secretaries of state, lieutenant governors, state senior election officials. I'm thinking Ryan, Germany. Election center, local government election officials. International Association, this is important, International Association of Government Officials. Homeland Security, Cyber Security and Infrastructure Security Agency, CISA. What was a big deal back in 2018? What was everybody talking about? You were talking about CISA. Cybersecurity and Infrastructure Security Agency. Whenever you're talking about voting machines connected to an internet in this country or in any other country, you're talking about cyber warfare. And who are the experts in cyber warfare? I can think of 4 military installations on the US East Coast and a couple in Europe and then in the Middle East. Cyber warfare and voting machines connected to the internet are very much related. okay? And I hope to dig in a little bit later. I know that everyone wants to get over to John's show, so I'll try and wrap this up. But let's go down with and read Harry's article in full. And then we'll get to the radio stations. That's another key point that I want to make tonight. 3 state election officials and 3 local election officials. Okay, so here Harry is outlining how these election boards should be run. Okay, this is not the American people that, the American people didn't hold a referendum saying this is how we want to revamp our elections. This was a top-down decision making that came from the powers that shouldn't be. This is the way we're going to handle elections now. Okay, not dissimilar to what we had with the health situation, the creation of health czars. The American people in each county didn't decide that we definitely need a health czar. I don't remember voting for a health czar. Okay, ex officio members. State, local, tribal, territorial government coordinating council. U.S. Election Assistance Commission. I didn't even know we had an Election Assistance Commission until about a year ago. The Department of Commerce, National Institute of Standards and Technology, which has the NIST has a major building just across the street from Microsoft NERD in Boston. Department of Defense, Federal Voting Assistance Program. Department of Homeland Security, Cybersecurity and Infrastructure Security Agency. Office of Intelligence and Analysis. Department of Justice, FBI. U.S. Postal Service, the Postal Service Inspector General, and the Postal Inspection Service. And remember, the Postal Service is not actually run by the federal government. It doesn't respond to the executive branch of the federal government. The Postal Service is a private company run by private citizens, very wealthy private citizens. BlackRock selects the political hacks now these are Harry's words. BlackRock selects the political hacks that run federal agencies. Okay. They control and determine who wins state and federal elections. Does BlackRock select members of the Election Infrastructure Subsector Government Coordinating Council? No. However, the Chief of Staff for the Biden administration does. Who is that? BlackRock's Tom Donilon. The Donilon brothers have been culo y camicha. How do you say? They have been like Siamese twins to Joe Biden for the past 18 years. Okay? I think that should be known. I think every American should be aware of that, no matter where you are on the political spectrum. Do Tom and BlackRock control election outcomes all by themselves? No. Donilon has help from the CIA, who Tom Donilon still advises using his top secret clearance. His brother Mike Donilon, Joe Biden's chief of political strategy, and Tom's wife, Kathy Russell. Kathy Russell works for, surprise, surprise, the United Nations, their subsidiary, the World Health Organization, soon to become World Health Authority, and the Chinese Communist Party. Let's click on that link. Kathy Russell. BlackRock to replace Biden with UN's Kathy Russell. Who at BlackRock has that kind of clout? Tom Donilon. He is the chairman of BlackRock. To what end? To transfer the federal government to the United Nations through a series of treaties And I want to underline again that most of these treaties we keep hearing about were never ratified by the Senate, were never ratified by the House of Representatives in the United States. They're very frequently written between the head of a three-letter agency like the DHS or the Secretary of, sometimes it was the Secretary of State or Undersecretary of State, and their counterpart in the other country. So, for example, the Ukraine, for I think 15 biolabs. The American people have no input to these treaties. That's the main point. Okay, let's go back to the main article. So, Kathy Russell, another name people should be talking about. UNICEF Executive Director. Well, isn't that special? UNICEF is such a great, they have the world's greatest marketing team. Even I contributed heavily to UNICEF up until around 2011 because I thought they were doing good work. They're helping kids all around the world. Assistive technology. We'll get into that next week. Pentagon takes over control of November 8th election. Okay, I know everybody wants to get over to see John O'Loughlin's show tonight, but I want to make a couple of things very clear. John O'Loughlin has devoted a considerable amount of time showing that since roughly 1810, there has been a growing percentage of generals and admirals who are loyal to the crown would be kind of an exaggeration, but not really loyal to the bottom 80% of the American people. Okay, their loyalties are towards, like George always talks about the Retired Admirals Club. They have a loyalty to these transnational entities that have a brilliant future in mind for all of humankind. And this is a problem now. This is really becoming a problem because, for example, we just had last August, NATO was handed over to, Norfolk, Virginia. The naval station in Norfolk, Virginia was handed over to NATO. And people of Virginia didn't get to vote on that. I don't think anybody else in America got to vote on that. So we have this incestuous relationship between bankers and the powers that they effectively control in Europe through NATO, trying to assert control over the paragovernmental agencies in America. And by paragovernmental, I'm talking about, for example, the U.S. Postal Service, which is not really a government agency. And through all the think tanks. Many of the think tanks, especially the largest 54 think tanks in Washington, have considerable power. Atlantic Council, for example. Many of the people on the Atlantic Council have served in foreign militaries. And so the fact that the Atlantic Council has so much sway on Capitol Hill is very disturbing. Okay, I'll let you I'll let each of you read up on these articles of Harry's. Again, I put in the description box Harry's two websites, newsothersmiss.com and brassballs.blog. Please send me your questions after reading all of those articles. And here's another point that I want to make. The radio stations, and I'm thinking in particular of Christian radio stations in Ohio. I remember well, because I was in Ohio at the time, I remember well from February 2021 until August of 2021, on every Christian radio station, you heard election fraud, election fraud, election fraud, election fraud. I contacted as many people as I could in Ohio back when Harry first came out with this story about Connect. So we're talking October 6th. I wrote to all the people I knew in the radio business, including the GM of one Christian radio station, and I told them about Connect. I wrote them snail mails. Not a single word now about Connect. So where did a year and a half ago was all election fraud, election fraud, election fraud, election fraud. But now nothing. This is the most important case in America, or at least the past 40 years. It could blow open everything, starting with the election fraud. But the election fraud is not exactly what you're thinking. Okay? Starting with the election fraud, and yet these Christian radio stations continue to remain mum on the issue of Connect and LJ Connections and their ties to powerful people in Boston and Amsterdam and Brussels and Rome. Why is that? Oh, by the way, those same Christian radio broadcasters, did they ever talk about the European adoption consultants in Strongsville, Ohio? I never heard them. I don't recall a single Christian radio broadcaster mentioning European adoption consultants in Strongsville, Ohio. The 39-year scandal run by mostly Republicans, starting with Robert Hughes, whose niece, Margaret Cole Hughes, was the director of. So this whole thing about, oh, well, child trafficking, human trafficking across the border, Route 23, that's all Democrats. No, it's not all Democrats. It's as the Republicans are just as guilty. And Dr. Ron Paul himself said that if he had run for office in any state, and he said this back in 2018, if he had run for office in any state as a Republican in 2018, he'd never get elected. Dr. Paul's words. So here is the big disconnect. I think that the reason that the radio stations in Ohio that were talking about election fraud in February, March, April, May, June, July of 2021 are suddenly silent when it comes to Connect is because BlackRock has a way of gently nudging them away from the story. Okay, now I have no direct proof. I haven't caught any of the broadcasters with their hand in the cookie jar, but they are aware, all of the general managers and many of the individual programs are aware of Connect because we Ospreys have made them aware, but they're choosing not to talk about it on their radio broadcasts. Okay. Anyway, enough of my babbling. Please support Harry the Greek. He spends a lot of money on these transcripts. Some of these transcripts cost $2 a page. If we get out of this mess, a good chunk of the credit goes to Harry the Greek up there in Cleveland, Ohio. Anyway, enough for one night. I'm going to do another broadcast on, continue my story about Mike Lee and in Amsterdam on Saturday at 7 p.m. And I promise this time it'll be 7 p.m. sharp. Please tune in. Then at 7 p.m. Eastern, it'll be 4 p.m. Pacific. Please tune in then. Thank you again for all your support, and we'll see you on Saturday or tomorrow. Protecting the Nest at noon tomorrow. Take good care, everybody. Be well, do good work, and keep smiling because it drives the AI crazy.